Hello, I'm Marcy Veroni. Avemco is proud to be the official insurance of NAFI. NAFI members are a special breed of CFIs, dedicated to higher professional standards and committed to safety. That's why we created and underwrite the NAFI CFI insurance program, with advantages, features, and savings available only to NAFI members. The NAFI CFI insurance program lets you save money by purchasing coverage only for the type of aircraft you instruct in. You have the option of insuring only for single-engine land and light sport, or for multi-engine, or seaplanes, or amateur-built, or any combination. You can tailor to your own situation. Another benefit of Avemco's NAFI CFI insurance program is you automatically get extended protection from lawsuits from former students as long as your policy is still in force at the time of their accident. If you have a covered claim under the NAFI CFI policy, we'll even pay your legal fees with no cap on the amount, regardless of your policy limit. Plus, you'll be covered for both instruction and your personal flying. For more information or to request a quote, please visit us online, or better yet, give us a call and we'll tell you all about the program. Happy, safe flying.
All right, it's that time again. Welcome to another Mentor Live, episode number 105. My name is Aaron Dabney. I have the coolest volunteer gig in all of NAFI, helping to coordinate this program. So glad you're here once again, and we're so glad to provide this free service to the aviation community. We've got a really good one for you this month, and I get to get in on the action and work with Mr. Greg Fife. And we're going to talk today about how the accident chain starts in training, particularly some hard lessons from the cockpit and the crash site. I think this is going to be really valuable for you, especially if you're starting out as an instructor. And if you're an experienced instructor, share this with someone who you know needs to see it. Before we jump in, I want to thank Avemco for their generous sponsorship of this month's broadcast. Avemco is the official insurance provider of NAFI, and you may or may not know this, but they're the only direct underwriter in the industry. And as they say, nobody knows the challenges of the CFI and insurance like Avemco. And without good insurance, you really are Sierra Oscar Lima. Their words, not mine. Few housekeeping items for you before we jump in. As with almost all of our programs, you can earn wings credit. Pretty simple process. Hang out until after we're done with the broadcast, but just below the broadcast window, here's a link. You click that, you log into your FA safety account, take the simple quiz. You're not done with until you get 100. Get your wing certificate, show your friends, bring them next time. You can also do a couple of other things on the broadcast window. Most notably, if you're not a member of NAFI while you're on this page, go ahead and join. As you know, you don't have to be a NAFI member to view MentorLIVE. It is a free service of the organization. And you don't have to be a CFI to be a member of NAFI. You just have to care about keeping aviation safe, one instructor and one student at a time. That's really what we're all about here. Finally, while you're on the broadcast tonight, we hope you'll join the chat. We've got two really good folks there helping to kind of, I would say monitor, but knowing these two, it's more instigating the chat room tonight. We've got our chair emeritus, Bob Mader. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got a younger pilot and CFI, Rob Knight there. He's volunteering for us as well. Rob was a very active, excellent CFI for about 2.5 years, and he's now over at Envoy. So pick his brain while you're there. To hop on the chat, just simply click the chat bubble below your broadcast window. Let me get this slide up for you. There we go. And make sure when you click that, you're going to log in as a guest. Make sure you enter your username first. That way your question's not your username. I want to give you credit on the air. And then ask away, interact with each other. Bug, Bob, Bug, Rob, enjoy yourself in there. So all that being said, again, we're excited to bring you the Accident Chain Starts in Training tonight. Really excited to have Greg on camera with me. Greg is a fellow board member, longtime NAFI board member. He's a former NTSB investigator and a senior captain on the GO team. He's done some really high-profile work in his career, including ValueJet 592, which is actually, Greg, one of the, maybe I'm going to age both of us, one of the earliest high-profile crashes I remember paying attention to, and Eastern 980. He's a prolific speaker, definitely as seen on TV. You've seen him on Air Disasters. You've seen him on NBC. Greg gets around talking about the cause of aviation safety. He's got a BS in aeronautical studies from Embry-Riddle, holds an ATP, CFI, II, AGI, and IGI. And of course, like I said, he's a long-term NAFI board member. I'll introduce myself as if you haven't heard about me before. 7-time NAFI master instructor. I'm full-time faculty now at the Institute for Aviation Sciences at Baylor University. I still maintain an active independent CFI practice in a small flight school as well. A little over 5,000 hours dual given. I've got a master's in education from Baylor, and of course I get to have a lot of fun with the guests and coordinate MentorLIVE, and I'm the secretary of your NAFI board of directors, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. So here's what we're going to do tonight. It's kind of going to be a give and take. Greg's a lot of fun to work with. If you've never had a conversation with him, you're going to come away better, trust me. We're going to look at 5 accidents, and then we've kind of got a freebie at the end for you as well. Greg is going to talk about the accidents from his point of view, both as an NTSB investigator and from someone who gets to deal with the aftermath, specifically the court cases. And where there is a probable cause, we'll talk about that. And we're going to stick to the facts. You know, we're not going to try to plant words in people's mouths or intentions in their heads. And then I'm going to jump in, add some flight training best practices. And I know Greg, because he's also an active CFI, will have some things to add. Since we're using real-world case studies, I think it's always prudent to lay out some ground rules. Not that you guys need to follow them, y'all are watching, but just to tell you how we're going to think about things. Number one, we're always going to remember that we're dealing with human lives here. These people, the people who have perished here, particularly, they loved and were loved, and we're going to remember that. We're going to remember that they were somebody to somebody. They're not just statistics. I think it's important for us to realize that there were no malicious actors here. In other words, we don't think that anybody who made a bad decision or made a mistake woke up that day and thought, I'm going to do something silly in an airplane. They all had the same goal that we all do, which is to have a successful flight and make it home. They just maybe made some decisions that negatively impacted that. And finally, that the one hypothesis we really can't any of us investigate is, what would I have done if I were there? Because I wasn't there, I can't know. So what we can do is look at the facts and tell you what kinds of best practices and what kinds of recommendations come to mind for us as experienced instructors when we see that, and then let you take the takeaways that you will. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg to set up this first accident, and then I'll pipe back up here in a couple of minutes with some best practices and recommendations. So Greg, for now, you got the controls, man.
Thank you, buddy. Well, it's good to be here. It's hot down here in Phoenix at 105. So, of course, flying little airplanes is a real challenge today. So, but appreciate your introduction, because that really sets the stage. It's all about the lessons learned. It's all about what we can take away from these accidents. And we say that all the time, but we really have to employ that. We don't just read it to see what's going on. So with this first accident, it involves a young flight instructor, a female flight instructor down in Newport News, Virginia, now 4 years ago. She was very well liked. She was, you know, the epitome of what you'd want to see in an instructor. She had a little over 330 hours of total time, 75 as a flight instructor. She had 2 students with her. She had one in the left seat in the flight controls. There was an observer sitting in the back seat. Now, from what the observer who survived this accident basically told the NTSB was that they were talking about how to take the airplane off. This was the student in the left seat's first takeoff, really first flight. And she coached him through what to expect as far as pulling back on the control yoke. What she didn't expect was the fact that as she initiated the takeoff, she then transferred controls, talked to the student, and said, okay, start pulling back now at rotation speed. Well, he did pull back on the control yoke. The airplane did get airborne, but rather than stop pulling and set a pitch attitude, he continued to pull. Unfortunately, he pulled the airplane right into an aerodynamic stall at 200 feet. And unfortunately, she wasn't on the flight controls fast enough, or even really shadowing the flight controls, to be able to affect a recovery from 200 feet or even prevent the airplane ever from getting into an aerodynamic stall. Unfortunately, the airplane basically went into a wing over and crashed off the side of the runway. The two front seat occupants, the flight instructor and that front seat student, were killed. The observer survived. And when we look at this, Aaron, these are the kinds of things that I see on a regular basis. We're turning out a lot of flight instructors out there from a variety of different operational discipline type environments. Whether you go to a university like my alma mater, Embry-Riddle, or UND, or some of the bigger university flight schools, or you come out of a local flight school, it's all about the operational discipline and really understanding and knowing the basics. One of the things that I try to do when I'm with somebody that's never been in an airplane, especially a general aviation airplane and intends to fly, is I do a dry run on the ground. So I let them feel as I talk them through what they're going to do. So if we're going to rotate, if we're going to take off and rotate, I basically get them on the controls and try to show them that this is what it's going to feel like. This is the rate at which you're going to pull. And then once we establish or get to our target pitch setting, you stop pulling and you just maintain. If they at least get that fundamental understanding on the ground, they won't be doing these things like unfortunately happened in this accident where she tried to coach him through it. Unfortunately, he thought he had to continue to pull. And so that part of the briefing was either not given or misunderstood.
All right. So I'm going to jump in here with a few of my thoughts, and I know you'll probably have kind of some follow-ups to my stuff, Greg, but just a few things that I think about as an instructor when I see an accident like this. And again, I wasn't there. All I can really do is look at the facts. I think number one, and this has been a change for me. Early in my career, I wouldn't have the customer take off on an intro flight, but I definitely had more than a few students take off on their very first flight lesson until I really thought long and hard about accidents like this. So now, some may disagree with me, but my practice is on an intro flight and certainly on a first flight lesson, I won't put the customer or the student on the controls. I want to see them in this environment first and see who I'm dealing with, see what their reaction is going to be, see if there's any weird anxiety responses. And to me, that's one simple firewall I can put in. I know it's not a guarantee, but if there's going to be some kind of an odd reaction, maybe I'll know about it before the second flight when I've actually put them on the controls. Number two is just this idea of vigilance when we're conducting not just takeoffs, but any kind of a critical phase operation with a student on board. My sense from working with instructor candidates is that a lot of us, when we're learning to do this or when we're relatively new at it, we get pretty keyed up about teaching landings. We get real vigilant about that. And particularly on a lesson or on a day where there's lots of reps in the traffic pattern, you kind of almost relax a little bit on that takeoff. And to me, that's when we're in the greatest danger. We're still low energy, we're low speed, we're high angle of attack, bad things can happen. So we need to make sure that we're paying as much attention and respecting the takeoff as much as we are the landing. Beyond that, when Greg talks about shouting on the controls, I don't think that means that we have to be at this ready position looking like we're about to pounce on something. But we need to be in a position to where we can get to the controls pretty quick. For me, in a Skyhawk, I'll often fly. This is my obviously my right hand. I'll often fly kind of leaned up on the glare shield. My right hand's kind of in a relaxed position, and I can come down pretty quick to the control yoke if I need to. So I'm there. I'm vigilant, but I don't look as much like I'm ready to pounce. But I'm still paying attention. And then next up, and I'll acknowledge that at the altitude that they were at, I don't know that there would have been anything that she could do to recover once the stall happened. I mean, 200 AGL, but just in general, this idea of stall proficiency is really important. I think in some circles, and I think you'd agree with this, Greg, in some circles, there's been maybe more of an emphasis placed lately on stall prevention than proficiency.
Yes.
But for us as flight instructors, there's just no excuse to not be proficient and comfortable at recognizing and recovering from a stall. That just goes without saying. I think some of that might come, the idea of provision versus proficiency. We're probably starting to see more and more instructors out there that have maybe done some spin training that maybe wasn't compliant with what we should really be doing per 61183. And so there's that nervousness about spins too, and we just don't want to mess with stalls. So we need to get proper training and deal with that. Number 4, I think about students being frozen on the controls, and we had a whole MentorLIVE about that. I went back and looked at the date. That was Nathan Ballard, a good friend of ours, in March 2024. If y'all want to go look that up in the archives, presented on students being frozen at the controls based on his own experience. But whatever our tactic is for getting a student unfrozen, we need to practice it, because it's another emergency procedure. And we know the law of exercise in part says we're going to be good at what we practice. We're not going to suddenly rise to the occasion when a student freezes on the controls. And I would suggest that if your strategy is to go hand to hand and actually fight the student on the controls during a critical phase, you're probably already behind that 8 ball. There's some other good recommendations out there covering eyes, pinching in the arm, stuff like that. But again, that's a topic for a whole nother presentation, and we had that, so go watch that. And then finally, Greg, you already talked about this, the importance of briefing. What are we expecting today? What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? People react differently to surprises, usually, than things they're expecting. So just a few things I think about there, just based on the facts. And if you have anything to add, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, a couple things real quick. You bring up stall proficiency. The last time, a lot of student pilots did an actual full stall with recovery was during their private pilot training, their initial training. You don't have to demonstrate a full stall for your commercial. You don't have to demonstrate a full stall for your ATP. It's first recognition and recover. So when you talk about proficiency, you should be going up either on your annual flight review or periodically going up with an instructor and doing full stall so that you have that muscle memory, you have that feeling, and you take that fear factor out of performing a full stall, because as we're going to talk about later on with an accident and stalls, and that is base to final turns and things like that, where you can get yourself into a very hairy situation at low altitude very quickly. And then like you were talking about, Aaron, one of the other real big issues, of course, is maintaining that high level of operational discipline, having the briefing being very concise. As flight instructors, we have to be good communicators. And unfortunately, and I tell all of the folks that I mentor and train, I say, look, if you plan on making aviation a career as a CFI, this is where your captain training really starts, because you are the mentor, you are the instructor, you have to be the communicator, you have to be the pilot in command when you need to be. And so hone these skills now, and communication, and that is effective communication, is so critically important.
Awesome. That's one thing I'm always preaching, is this for those of us who are, or for those of you who are doing this to build, I won't say build those hours, build that experience. This is absolutely an apprenticeship to be a captain. Couple of comments coming in from the chat room. Bob brings up a good point. Obviously part of that briefing, part of that communication you're talking about is briefing that proper three-way exchange of flight controls. But Bob says, but if I say let go, that means let go now. Question from a viewer, Kurt says, Greg, I wonder if you have seen anything about the backseat survivor remembering the CFI giving the student any sort of a firm or emphatic briefing about positive exchange of controls, et cetera. Was there anything in the record about that?
No, unfortunately, it was very superficial information. There was some talk that occurred because supposedly that was her normal modus operandi, but there was nothing to validate that in the record that I saw.
Okay, so we can't really say if that was a failing or not, but it's definitely a takeaway to consider from a scenario like this.
And as a flight instructor, you would expect that to have taken place.
Right. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next scenario here. So Greg, I'm going to go ahead and give you this slide for number 2. We're going to talk about some things we might not think about when it comes to an inadequately trained pilot who we put out there into the NAS, into the wild.
One of the things that I see quite a bit now in my afterlife, after the NTSB and the litigation work that I do, is that a lot of flight instructors and even some DPEs think that after they are done with a student, and that student either obtains a certificate or rating, and they go off and do their own thing, that they are absolved of any responsibility for that particular person. And that isn't necessarily true. There have been a number of accidents. I've worked a number of accidents where newly minted pilots, either certificate or ratings, have gone out and promptly either injured themselves severely or killed themselves. This is an accident where the NTSB found that to be, again, an issue. This was a A90 King Air that was dropping skydivers. And unfortunately, with this pilot, he had wasn't able to make it through a lot of the training. The board identified that he had failed multiple check rides for his private, his commercial, and his instrument rating. So it was one of those things where after, quote, retraining, he was able to pass. But when they looked at the actual flight instructor, they saw that his pass rate, or at least his rate for putting students forward, was well below the national average. Unfortunately, that ferreted out into this accident where you had this pilot who, I mean, he had 10 people on this King Air and took off, and unfortunately made a yank and bank type of maneuver, as you can read from this short briefing, and unfortunately lost the aircraft at low altitude, crashed, and it was all fatal. As the board went in there and really started to dig into this pilot's background, they found these deficiencies. And one of the things that was interesting was that the board went back to see who the flight instructor was that gave this particular pilot their training. And that's how they identified that this was a problem for not only the student who had multiple failures, but they held that flight instructor responsible. And I think, Aaron, we have the probable cause statement for this. And if you read the bolded print on the bottom, it says the probable cause was the pilot's aggressive takeoff maneuver at, of course, at low altitude, 10 people on board. He got into an accelerated stall and subsequently lost control of the aircraft. But the key here is the contributing to the accident statement that says the pilot's lack of training and experience with handling qualities of the airplane in this flight regime. And then, of course, contributing to the pilot's deficiencies was the FAA's lack of awareness that the pilot's flight instructor was providing substandard training. You go out there, you want to go drone around and accumulate time so you can move on to the airlines, and you're not giving 150% to that student. Don't think that if they do make it through the system and they do become a pilot and they do go away, that nothing is coming back on you. I can guarantee it, because every accident that I investigate, even now in my afterlife as an expert witness, I look at the particular person who's involved, and then I look at their flight instructor, and I look at the DPE, because I want to see where there are deficiencies in this training, especially if it's instrument training. If they just run, pay me $1,000 and I'll make you a pilot kind of attitude, I guarantee you're not going to be absolved of the responsibility. Yeah, you weren't in the aircraft. Yeah, you don't work for that company anymore, but that doesn't mean you still don't have a responsibility for the fact that that person who you trained or failed to train properly, even though they went through a check ride and they squeaked through and they got their certificate or their rating, doesn't mean that you were adequately training that particular person. And I see it over. I'm working 2 accidents like that right now.
So I think for some of us, seeing the instructor that directly called out in the probable cause statement might be kind of a shocker. And you're saying that happens really often. So not to misplace the concern, but I wonder if you talk just a little bit before we move on to my recommendations, in which ways would we typically see an instructor held accountable? Not that having blood on your hands is not bad enough. I mean, not to get religious here, but I think there are some eternal implications if I don't do my job well. But how else might the instructor be held accountable in a situation like this?
Well, again, we know that the instructor notes, instructor, syllabus. If you're training someone as a freelance instructor and you don't have a specific procedure, protocol, or training syllabus, you go out and you do what you think is necessary for that pilot to be able to go take a check ride. And of course, they have an accident or a serious incident. And of course, the first question I'm going to ask as an investigator is, show me your training syllabus, show me all the elements of it, show me where they were deficient, show me where they passed, show me your teaching. So I will dig into that, because that is the basis, that's the foundation for whether or not they were successful as a pilot or unsuccessful as a pilot. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at 2 DPEs right now who gave check rides to pilots that, based on their logbook, technically shouldn't have been put forward for a check ride. And these are the kinds of deficiencies that, once there's an incident or an accident, you're going to have the scrutiny. Yeah, if nothing had happened, nobody would have ever known the difference. But I'm working an accident right now involving a 135 operator who, after this particular accident, the FAA went in and did a comprehensive inspection and found their training program was deficient, and found multiple pilots did not meet the requirements for 135 training. So all these pilots that had been flying 135 flights were technically unqualified and illegal to do what they did. So it goes well beyond saying goodbye, hey, congratulations, you're a private pilot now, and never seeing this person again doesn't mean that somebody isn't going to be asking you questions if, unfortunately, that pilot takes their family and, either injures them or kills them in an accident.
So worst case scenario for the instructor, obviously civil liability, because that's when a guy like you gets involved. Certificate action, perhaps?
Absolutely, because one of the 9 areas of responsibility when the FAA who is an automatic party to an NTSB investigation, the FAA has 9 areas of responsibility. One of those is to make sure that the pilot or pilots, depending on type of operation, are current, qualified, proficient, and have met the standard. And, Aaron, we've talked about this in the past, and that is, people go, well, the federal aviation regulations are the minimum standard. No, they aren't. They are the standard. They are the standard, not the minimum standard. That's a term of art that is just proliferated itself. And I, having worked for the government, I had to interpret the standard. And the standard is what the FAA lays out in the regulation. And if you really want to understand regulations, take the time to read the preamble for like 91.3, your pilot and command responsibility. Read the preamble to see what the FAA expects of you, because that's what's going to be expected. And when I look at a pilot operation, whether it's a CFI or a certificated pilot, especially a CFI right now, because we've had a lot of CFI related accidents, what is their responsibility? And a lot of these CFIs don't know, other than to provide flight instruction, with a syllabus. And that it has to go well beyond that, Aaron. Come on. I mean, you run a flight school, you can't just teach the basics.
Right. Well, and I just sitting here listening to you, I could have added a takeaway here of number 1, definitely, if you don't have a syllabus, what are you doing? We talk about that a lot. And number 2, documentation.
Yes.
Beyond that, a few things I think about here, and I've spoken about this before. I think we as instructors need to really take seriously our role as a gatekeeper to the NAS. We can't put all of that on a DPE. If we see a private pilot student in the 61 world, we're seeing them for at least 40 hours. The national average suggests a heck of a lot more than that. How long does a DPE see them for? An hour and a half to 3 hours in an oral exam and about an hour and a half on a flight. Who is in a better position to really know whether this person's qualified to be the captain of an aircraft? We are. So we
Yeah.
need to be that the fine grit sandpaper, and to me, the DPE should simply be rubber stamping what we've seen. I think we've got to do a better job with that. I'm a big fan of building margins into training and performance. And you mentioned the regulations being the standard. I also don't think there's anything wrong with saying if the ACS is the standard, let's make sure that our applicants' worst performance and preparation was to ACS. Not their best performance, not their average performance, but their worst performance. And I think we should be teaching margins in aircraft performance also. I might get some flack for this. Hey, interpolating performance charts is really good math and you're going to be right. But with an airplane that's seen God knows how many hard landings and a high time engine and a student pilot flying, you can be mathematically correct right into the trees. So
Yeah.
adding some margin for performance to account for reality. Stall proficiency again, and I think a particularly noteworthy thing to say here is proficiency in recognizing accelerated stalls, because that's what got us here, recognizing that, the VSO and VS, those are valid for 1G. How's the airplane going to behave at higher than 1G?
Yeah.
I think we have to consider no training of formality. So something that's an add-on or a simple endorsement or whatever. We can't treat things like, oh, you know what you're doing, we don't need a plan, oh, this is a professional courtesy. No, every training carries stakes. And finally, you just got done saying this way better than I could. The impacts of our job go way beyond that practical test. For some of us eternally, but at least for all of us, we can be held to account by the government. Couple of good questions coming in from the chat. I want to hush up a minute and take some of these questions. Ken asks, what's being done to remediate these instructors who are found deficient beyond the obvious that we've already discussed?
It's a very good question, because there's been a lot of debate about whether or not the FAA has sufficient resources to perform properly their respective oversight. Of course, they do track, flight instructor proficiency as well as DPE proficiency with regard to pass-fail rates, and they monitor those national averages. They monitor the respective flight instructor and DPE, and if they see that they're falling below an average, they may go in and counsel them and things like that. The problem is that because we have so many, flight instructors out there, and unfortunately not enough DPEs. You just ask anybody around who waits months for a check ride. The question is, are they really competent and qualified? I've been talking to a lot of DPEs. Aaron, you and I have had this conversation. We've had this during board meetings with NAFI, and that is there are people that are being put forward for a particular pilot certificate or rating that don't make it out the front door because they can't answer basic questions from the DPE. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of, every one of the private pilot students that I've been talking to and randomly run into and that kind of stuff, I start chatting them up about maintenance logbooks. They have zero clue. Their responsibility as the pilot about how to determine if the airplane's airworthy even before they walk out to the airplane. They don't know how to read a logbook. That's an automatic DQ for going on a check ride. Because if you can't demonstrate to a DPE that airplane's airworthy, we're not going.
I think when we as a profession, when we send sort of that Hail Mary pass to a check ride, the worst thing that can happen is that applicant passes.
Yes.
I want to do one more question and then we need to get moving. We're having a good conversation, but this time's going really quickly. Yeah. Nikki is a student pilot. Nikki, thank you so much for being here. Are there any questions I should ask an instructor before I go for instruction to help keep me safe too? That's a darn good question and not taught enough.
Yeah. You're in the business, Aaron, and you establish the culture. You establish the environment for your instructors in their interaction with students. But you also have clients who come in, they sit down with you, go, hey, I'm thinking about learning how to fly. You have to set that stage because you are the one that are really the responsible executive, if you will, the accountable executive for establishing how your flight instructors are going to end up teaching. So for a student like Nikki, it is, tell me what your philosophy is. Tell me what your goals are. Because if they're just driving around to log time so that they can move on to bigger and better things like more money at an airline, you're not going to get 150% of their attention. You're going to get enough to possibly get through that particular training, but they're not going to be plugged in.
Philosophy is huge. Why are you an instructor? Hours and paycheck is just fine, but there needs to be something more there. And Nikki, if I could give you just a few more things, if I could talk to prospective students, do you have a syllabus? Let me see it. Do you have an SOP? Let me see it. And tell me about how you teach risk management. Yes. I don't want to hear risk management being one standalone ground lesson and we move on. I want to hear risk management as a way of being in a constant discussion.
Safety has to be a core value, start to finish. You can't turn it on when you get to the airport and then turn safety off when you park the airplane. It's always got to be there.
Yeah. All right, we got to keep moving here. So now let's do the old classic here, Greg, and run out of gas.
Here you got a flight instructor with, assumptions and expectations in aviation will hurt you or kill you. And in this particular instance, you had a flight instructor who went up on a duel and had done some flight training, assumed that they had sufficient gas, landed, and when the new students came out and they pre-flighted the aircraft, the flight instructor had them check the fuel and everything else. And unfortunately, as you and I have joked, how do you check fuel? Well, do you look in the fuel tank? Do you stick your finger in there? Well, I don't have a calibrated finger, so I wish I did, but I don't. I mean, and on a high wing airplane, unless you can stand on your toes or have a ladder, you don't really know how far down that fuel level is. Well, it's apparent that the students, when they said, yeah, it looks like we got about half a tank of fuel, the flight instructor actually went in, turned the switch on, and yep, the gauges say we got about a half tank of fuel. Well, we all know.
Precise.
We all know that fuel gauges on any airplane, unless it's a totalizer, are pretty much inaccurate. Well, unfortunately, they went up, and he had transferred the controls. The flight instructor transferred the controls to the student. They were doing maneuvers, and voila, they have fuel exhaustion. The flight instructor had to take the airplane back. Fortunately, they were successful in landing the airplane safely, but he was the first one to admit we ran out of gas. And the question is, you're a flight instructor. You're supposed to be teaching these basics. You're supposed to be teaching this operational discipline. You're supposed to be meticulous. You're supposed to determine whether or not you have the adequate resources, and in this case, fuel, to perform the flight. What kind of bad habits are you teaching these people by going, oh yeah, we don't really have to use a calibrated anything. Just check the fuel. Yep, we got fuel in there. It doesn't work that way. And we've got more fuel exhaustion accidents going on, not only in this kind of environment, flight instruction and student. I did one where, again, I had a flight instructor who the airplane was supposed to have gone out with full tanks. Well, the flight instructor who took that airplane with a student in the morning went out, they flew for an hour, 1.2, I think. They came back. The second instructor with the student thought that because that airplane was supposed to have gone out with full tanks, they only flew for 1.2. We got enough gas. Boom, they run out of gas during the middle of their lesson. What they didn't know is this, the flight instructor the night before with their student didn't fill the airplane up with fuel. These guys in the morning, they checked the fuel, but they didn't really check the fuel. And unfortunately, it wasn't full. And so assumption was, well, they only flew 1.2. Well, there really was 3.8 on that tank of gas. So it's these kinds of things. It's maintaining that vigilance. It's maintaining that operational discipline. And don't assume. I check fuel tanks. I check fuel caps, even after a student or even a certificated pilot that I fly with. I will go over there and just make sure for my own self-preservation that they've done what they were supposed to do.
Yep. You're saying a lot of what I have on my recommendations here, Greg. I guess we can't say we can prevent 100% of anything. We can prevent a lot of this by having sound SOPs, by having personal minimums. You and I talked about this the other night. I realize that there are going to be situations where we are limited by max takeoff weight, where we are limited by airplane performance. But in general, you hear me? I said in general, not in absolute. I don't think there's a lot of good reasons to depart on a training flight without full gas. I
I
just think
agree.
I know there are exceptions to that rule, so I'm saying in general. In terms of fuel verification and management practices, little things. I know it's hot or I know it's cold, but we really ought to be out there when the airplane is being fueled, watching.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
line techs, I know they work so hard, but I'm not going to trust my life to them sight unseen. I wouldn't to anybody else, so why am I going to do it with them? We need to be trusting, I think, above and beyond anything else. I think one of two things, and tell me if you agree with this. Number one, we need a properly calibrated fuel stick if we're gonna go with partial.
Yes.
On a lot of airplanes I teach, the only other two ways that I feel like I've got a guarantee of what's in those tanks is when it is clearly topped off, or if there's a tab in there that the manufacturer has published, here's the value of the tab. Beyond those two spots, if I don't stick it, I just act like I don't know where my fuel level is. And then finally, trusting the gauges. Bob in the chat says, oh boy, Cessna gauges. Yeah, exactly. A couple things there. They've got to be working. They got to be there. I know 91-205 and all that. But to me, my best fuel gauge is this little dude right here.
Yep.
We know our fuel flows. And I've got a picture of my Cub there because it's got the simplest fuel gauge in the world. It's a piece of wire on a float. Foolproof, right? I've seen the float stick.
Yeah.
And that I'm seeing the same amount of wire for suspiciously long amount of time. Well, guess what? I've still got my fuel flow here.
I've done several accidents, Aaron, where when the airplane was refueled, it was sitting on a sloped ramp. So when they fueled the airplane, of course, the high wing, they thought they topped it off, except when that airplane went level, it was no longer topped off, and their fuel endurance went down by about an hour. So, I mean, you have to pay attention to the little things. It's the little things that will bite you, not big things. And that's why, as an aviator, not just a pilot, but as an aviator, you have to have that situational awareness through all phases of flight, to include walking out to the airplane, because that's going to give you an understanding of, okay, here's the environment the airplane is sitting in. It's on a sloped ramp. I know that if I get fuel right now, I'm going to have more fuel than the low side, than the high side. So, again, you have to be cognizant of that. You cannot just accept it at face value.
Exactly. All right, let's keep moving here. What do we have next? Another classic, Greg.
In-flight breakups. In-flight breakups are probably the most devastating kinds of aircraft accidents in general aviation, because of course they're happening at altitude. And if you sit in a dark room at night, especially as an investigator, after you've gone out to see the wreckage and the carnage, and just try to think of what was transpiring in the airplane to lead up to it, and then what was transpiring as that airplane was coming down in pieces. This was a guy who owned a flight school. Unfortunately, his attitude got the better of him. He had gone up to pick up a very prominent attorney who was going from Connecticut back down to Charleston, South Carolina. And in fact, if you've ever watched the show Southern Charm or Southern Hospitality, there was a character in there that this happened to be that character's attorney. So he had prominence in Charleston. He and his wife were coming back down. It was being flown under the guise of a training flight. This gentleman was a pilot, a private pilot. He was supposedly working on a multi-engine rating. They were flying a Piper Seneca. They took off. Now, there were known deficiencies with the airplane, including the attitude indicator and a few other things with the airplane, but the owner of the flight school decided I can make this happen and tried to at least flight plan and work his way around any kind of instrument conditions. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. He continued to try and climb above the weather to the point where they got up to 19,000 feet, all of which was done without oxygen. And unfortunately, they got into those IMC conditions. And at the very end of this flight path, you can see that hypoxia and lack of instrument proficiency, because the pilot in command, in this case, it was, quote, the flight instructor, was not proficient. And unfortunately, they lost the airplane and killed 3 people. And so when we look at it, it's that can-do attitude. It's that I can accomplish the mission attitude, and that will hurt you or kill you. I've done, I don't know how many accidents involving general aviation pilots where during the winter time, we're on, Christmas vacation, we're coming out of Texas, we're taking the kids skiing. The weather isn't the greatest, but I got an airplane that has all this pretty stuff. I know where the terrain is. I know where the weather is. I know where other aircraft are. As long as I got a magenta line and an autopilot, I can make it happen, regardless of the fact that there's a snowstorm going on. And unfortunately, they don't make it to destination. So when we look at these kinds of accidents, this in-flight breakup, this guy tried to accomplish the mission. And unfortunately, he put this airplane in peril. And it all started with his arrogant attitude. The NTSB wrote in their report, and you can see it in this probable cause statement, that the instructor's decision to conduct and continue a visual flight rules flight into instrument meteorological conditions with known flight instrument anomalies, which resulted in spatial disorientation, caused the in-flight breakup. This is all about attitude. We are flight instructors. We set the attitude. And if we have a bad attitude, we have an arrogant attitude, we have a careless and reckless attitude, that's going to transfer to the student. Why? Because, well, my instructor said we're good to go. We must be good to go. But they don't understand the foundation of that. And we have that responsibility as flight instructors. But you also have that same responsibility as a certificated pilot, because the people sitting in the back of the airplane, as well as the people underneath the airplane, are depending on you to be doing the right thing all the time.
I don't know about you, and I'm curious what the viewers in the chat would say about this. In general aviation anyway, I have a real problem with the word mission. To me, and I'm not talking bad about you, I'm talking about that attitude. Mission means something that must get done. Mission to me means there's good guys taking fire from bad guys, and we've got to fly close air support. Mission to me means there's an injured patient somewhere. We don't need to launch that bad. That's why I hated, and this is not a political statement, I promise, but I hated notices to air missions for that very reason. I thought that was a dumb word.
Yes, I agree. And I use that, accomplish the mission. Well, unfortunately, some of these general aviation pilots think it is a mission to take the family on vacation, and come hell or high water, we're going to go to destination. We'll figure out a way once we start flying. I don't know how many pilots I've investigated where the last words were, I'm going to go take a look. If it's too bad, I'll come back. And they don't come back.
Yep. So how can we avoid this? I mean, nothing new under the sun here. Back to the SOPs and personal minimums. I know some very experienced, very proficient instrument pilots with very capable airplanes who say, you know what, 2,000 feet and 3 miles is it for me. They know the reality. And, I'm a fan of that. We've got relatively high instrument minimums in my flight school because we're flying single engine airplanes. And if, God forbid, the engine quits an IMC, I would like a little bit of time when I pop out of this clouds to decide, do I land on the school cafeteria or on the highway next to the school? That's morbid, but like you said, the ground is counting on us.
Yes.
Because we can doesn't mean we should. Obviously, and you've already said this, sound ADM. I mean, if Bob Mader famously says we have to make decisions when we're with students that would not lead them to harm, and if we model those decisions, well, that's at least a basis of sound ADM. I mean, I don't know really what else to say about that. Plan for instrument proficiency. This is another one where I feel like I might catch a little bit of flack, but what do we teach private pilot students? Trust your instruments. Trust your instruments with your 3 hours of hood time.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
a difference between 3 hours of hood time and continued proficiency training and 3 hours of hood time 20 years ago with 5 minutes of it every 24 months on your flight review. I
Yes.
think if we take that statement at face value, it's asinine advice. I think it has to be tempered with, or you must stay proficient. We talked about this, at the very least, a private pilot ought to be able to get the airplane level with instruments. Then we can
Yep.
worry about other stuff.
Yep.
Let's get the airplane level first.
And
then VFR IMC, that's an AP. So let's practice those things. Let's practice recovering from the unusual attitude. Let's practice getting the airplane level. Let's practice making that turn and getting out of there. Like you said, when we were getting ready for this, it wasn't that way back there, but we can't get back there if we can't get the dadgum thing level first.
Correct. And then again, you got to throw the ego out. You don't need to roll the airplane into a 30-degree bank turn and race to get, back to where you came from. If you're comfortable with 10 degrees, the airplane's going to turn at 10 degrees. It's going to turn at 20 degrees, but it's a comfort level. And it's really the ability to recover if for some reason during the course of that turn, you feel like control is being lost. You can roll very quickly back to wings level. Wings level is your safe harbor. You will be able to navigate and do other things as long as you keep the wings level and the airplane under control. Once it's out of control, it's impossible. And unfortunately, I've seen too many of them. One of the other things that you bring up here is that 3 hours as a private pilot that you get from a CFI. Here's a little misnomer that a lot of CFIs don't understand. And that is, you don't have to be a double I to give the 3 hours of instrument instruction, but you must be a double I to give instrument instruction. And unfortunately, I've worked several accidents right now where straight CFIs, not double I, straight CFIs were giving instrument instruction. That's illegal. It's in non-compliance with the federal aviation regulations. You can do it for a private for the 3 hours, and that gets back to your point, Aaron. That's not proficiency. That's demonstrating how to get out of a bad situation.
Yeah, if that, yeah. Touche, Bob. Bob in the chat says there actually is one mission in general aviation, and that's to get home to your family. Amen to that.
Yep, I agree.
My wife knows how much I love flying, but her favorite trick of mine in the airplane is when I put it in the hangar and come home at night. So
yep, my dog depends on me.
Yep. Okay, unfortunately, and I'm not making light of this, I'm just pointing out how often stuff like this is happening. Unfortunately, one more classic we've got to cover here, Greg.
And that is mid-air collisions. And unfortunately, we've had quite a few of them in the recent past. We had 2 of them out in Colorado where I am, both involving flight instructors and students in training flights and civilians, that is other people getting into the same airspace. In this particular instance, we had a CFI with a student, and they were doing touch and go landings at the runway. They were communicating. They were doing all the things you would expect them to do to talk about what their intentions were at this particular airport. They were doing touch and go landings. They were going to do short field takeoff and landing, and they announced all of that. There was another airplane that eventually entered into the pattern, a Lancer, and was approaching the same runway. And they did initiate a go around because of conflicting traffic. But on their second approach coming in, after the Cessna pilots had made their announcement that they were going to execute a stop and go on the runway, the instructor heard the Lancer pilot announce another go around, and unfortunately went right over the top of them as these the flight instructor and student were initiating their takeoff from this stop and go. And you can see from this graphic, these are screenshots that the NTSB put together, where the 172 on the climb out, unfortunately, they had the right of way. The Lancer ran right over the top. And unfortunately, again, it's about communication. Can't stress it enough, whether it's in the cockpit or over the air. Communicate, communicate, communicate. It's about situational awareness. Aaron, you and I talked about this, and I know you're going to bring it up, and that is just because you got ADSB doesn't mean you're safe.
Yep. And of course, this one's fresh enough. February of last year, we know there's no PC statement here, but probably not looking for any surprises here, I would guess.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. But again, it's about communicating, and that is, do you understand the communication? If you don't understand the communication, that's why you have a radio. That's why you have a finger. Push the press to talk and ask the question. Cessna 172 on the runway. What are your intentions? You know, I mean, it's all about us communicating. You can't just assume that they're going to take off and fly the pattern. They could be departing the pattern, you know, in a non-standard way.
I think it's important. I think we shouldn't instill a fear of breaking the cool pilot talk code on the radio when we need to figure out, hey, real quick, what are you doing and where are you going? Help me out here.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you know, unfortunately, our ego gets in the way. You know, oh, I'm a pilot, you know, and I should know this, or they're going to do this. You can never assume another pilot's going to do what you think they're going to do.
Yeah. So this picture, I thought about this photo when I was putting the slide deck together, and yes, it is zoomed in a little bit for a good picture. It's not this generation of iPhone. I think it's one or two before, but that was company traffic for me. That was a customer's airplane with one of my other CFIs on board, and that's 500-foot separation in a hold. So the sky's not that big, you know. Few recommendations here, obviously, and you've already beat this drum and stomped your foot pretty hard on this: proper scanning and collision avoidance, which means look out the window. We had a controller at my home airport who unfortunately aged out and retired. I so enjoyed working with this guy, but somebody commented on the chat room, my least favorite words to hear, I got him on the fish finder, and yeah, this guy's name was Vinny. That was the controller's name. And he had an attitude like a Vinny sometimes, but when he heard I got on the fish finder, he would key up and say, "Do you see him out the window?" Because
yeah, that's perfect.
I think what's that meme say? You know, my third grade teacher said you can't grow up and get a good job looking out the window all day. Look at me, I'm a pilot now, so let's look out the window.
Yeah. And
teach adequate scanning, you know, dividing the airspace up into chunks. What is the airplane going to look like? What does, you know, 2 o'clock and same altitude look like? Let's model that and not just model having our head down on that ADSB. Now, ADSB in is a great tool. You and I have talked about this because I love the way you put this. It tells us where do we need to be paying more attention outside. But if we assume that all traffic's on the ADSB, I had a picture of my Cub a few slides ago that there's no electrical system. If your sole traffic awareness is ADSB in, I'm going to see you because I'm looking outside. I like looking out the window. I'm easily distracted like that, but you ain't going to see me. So let's make sure we're teaching the proper use of ADSBN. Obviously, vigilance and non-tower patterns, like you said, let's not assume that just because we don't see somebody on the fish finder or we don't hear them on the radio, they're not there. Doesn't mean it's right, but if Grandpa Joe is out there in his Cub, not on the radio, he ain't doing anything illegal. So we got to be looking for him. And I think the best way to see Grandpa Joe is for us to be doing the right things and for us to remain vigilant and for us to assume, okay, yeah, this non-towered airport is charted right-hand traffic. Let's look up when we're turning base and make sure there's not somebody on that opposing left base, because physics doesn't care what the chart says. So that paying attention, being vigilant. We all know, we've heard it and we've repeated it. One of the most dangerous places to be is around a non-tower pattern on a pretty day. And I think that's changed a whole lot. And then finally, proper procedures at non-tower patterns. It doesn't mean everybody else is going to do it, but if we do it, I feel like we've at least got a little bit better chance at seeing the other person. And I've got one more graphic here. I couldn't help myself in terms of bringing this up. This has been sort of a perennial gripe among I guess, people between our vintages, but I'm
Yeah.
on board with it. If you're teaching this, I defy you to look at 90-66 Charlie about non-towered apps, and you go in there and you do a word search in your Adobe Acrobat, and you tell me where in the heck the word teardrop shows up.
Yep.
I'll tell you right now, it does not. This is the graphic out of the appendix in the advisor circular. It does not describe a descending turn on top of the downwind. And I know you're seeing this, I'm seeing this. A lot of people who I respect a whole lot, who have got a heck of a lot more experience than I do, are seeing this. It's very clear. We clear the pattern, then we descend the pattern altitude, then we turn inbound. And the whole point is to get inbound at a 45 degree to the downwind at pattern altitude. And that's just one example of, we got to fix how we're teaching patterns to give ourselves a chance to see and be seen. I'm going to stomp my foot pretty hard on that. What do you have to add here, Greg?
I was going to say a perfect example of that was an accident that occurred out here about a year ago in Colorado, where you had a flight instructor and a student who were doing a practice instrument approach going into a runway. There was an aerobatic airplane that had been in the box out there, joined the pattern, and came in over the top, just like you talked about, 180 degree over the top turn, and descended down into the 172 on final approach. They crashed at the approach end of the runway.
Yep. Jim H on the chat said it perfectly. Only from what he's seeing out there, only about half of general aviation have ADS-B out. So look.
Yeah. It's a very simple principle.
Yeah. It's one of my faculty colleagues at Baylor, and talk about getting to work with some total bad A's. This guy was a Coast Guard helicopter pilot, and boy, some of his mission stories, that's a mission right there, will curl your toes. But he calls these the Mark I eyeball. Love it. Use your Mark I eyeballs. All right, y'all, we've got one more freebie for you that Greg wanted to make sure we included. And I'm going to let you take this one away, and I'll advance it as you talk.
One of the things that I'm noticing is that pilots don't really understand the airplane they're flying. We know that we're supposed to be looking at either the POH or the AFM or the combined POH AFM, but you have to read it. You have to understand it, and then you have to understand what modifications to that particular airplane have been performed. Because with a lot of the STCs, especially where you have a different engine installed on the airplane, there is usually a supplement to the flight manual. This example, I'm working one right now, and I've worked several of these similar type accidents where this is what you see as the cover page for an A36 Bonanza. The A36 Bonanza was originally equipped with an IO520, a Continental IO520, normally aspirated engine. They ended up having a modification put in. This is the Tornado Alley turbo normalized A36 Bonanza. So they take the IO520 out and they put in an IO550, and of course they have a turbocharger on there for the turbo normalization. With this particular modification comes a flight manual supplement. And as you see, the middle page are the prescribed procedures that were in the original flight manual. And you can see that for engine failure, there is a set of procedures, throttle closed, and you run through 1 through 4. And if you then keep going down, then there's another set of procedures for condition, loss of engine power. Well, how do you determine that in flight? Did you have an engine failure or just a loss of engine power? Because a loss of engine power could actually result in a total failure. But those procedures are different. But those were attributed to the IO520 that was originally installed in the airplane. When the turbo normalized system was installed, the flight manual supplement, which is on the right side, that last page, if you look at those procedures, it tells you nothing about engine failure or loss of power. It really goes right to restart, because it assumes that you already have some sort of engine anomaly. And if you read those procedures, they are opposite to what was originally published for the IO520. So the question is, Which ones do you follow?
Well, you're going to need to follow the SAFM. You've modified the airplane, assuming the airplane has been modified legally, which in this case it was.
Yep, yep. And so when you look at it, that's why you need to find that supplement, and that supplement must reside in the flight manual. If it's not in the flight manual, then you got a serious airworthiness issue. But those are the procedures that take precedent. The one on the very right, the ones that are published in the manual, those were for a different engine, and you can see that the procedures for the turbo normalized system are different. They're almost opposite to what they are for the IO 520. That's why you must understand the airplane you're flying. You must know what modifications have been made, because that's going to change how you perform in an abnormal or emergency situation.
I think a couple of things come to mind here real quick, and I know we're a little bit past the hour, but y'all stick with us, and we'll land this airplane safely here pretty quickly. But obviously, this is a pretty extreme scenario, but it does go to show you just how drastically different SAFM procedures can be. And I think particularly those of us in the 61 world, we do get to fly a lot of different airplanes, but I think this is a good wake-up call that when we hop in that customer airplane, we need to make sure we know which STCs are installed, how's this airplane been modified, make sure there's an appropriate SAFM there and study it, and not just assume you've seen one, you've seen them all. I think that's incredibly dangerous for us, and that's a bad example to set for the customer.
Yep. I mean, look how many modifications have been made to a Cessna 172 over the years with different engines.
Yeah. It just there's a line in 1.6 right talking about that kind of thing where you learn to fly in an environment like that, and somebody says, can you fly this airplane? Of course I can. Of course I have. Well,
Yeah.
Let's study that first. Okay, so I'll tell you what. Let me see. Is that a question coming in? Let me take a look at the chat real quick. Yeah, just a little bit of chatter back and forth about, know thy airplane. So what's interesting here, Greg, and I think it's a good news, bad news thing, how quiet the chat's been in terms of questions, and that tells me something. That tells me that we're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
So number one, I think the people who tend to participate in things like MentorLIVE, they're doing things the right way. So I think if there's no earth-shattering takeaways here. First of all, tell me if you disagree with me. I don't think there's been a new way invented to kill ourselves in an airplane in a long time. But I think the job of everyone who's viewing this right now or on replay is share this with a CFI candidate or a new CFI, and let's set the tone for their career.
Well, we have to do that, Aaron. We've had these discussions over the years as a board at NAFI. I go out and preach the safety message. I know that all of our board members who make presentations and actually are DPEs or CFIs preach that when they're teaching or giving a check ride. But it's a very small audience. And if you want to show people how smart you are and how good a pilot you are, act like an aviator. Do the briefings. Do thorough briefings. Include the passengers in those briefings to give them a comfort level that you know what you're doing. Because I've seen this a lot where I've talked to passengers and they go, all I saw was this pilot doing all sorts of stuff and I was scared because they never told us what happened or what we should do or how to get out of the airplane. You have to be an aviator. You have to demonstrate that operational discipline from the time you walk out of the terminal building to the time you park that airplane and walk back in. It is all about being a very disciplined, very structured individual. And as a flight instructor, teaching that operational discipline, that vigilance, that communication, because that's what these students are going to take with them as they further their aviation, whether it's their career or just further themselves as an aviator with additional certificates and ratings. But we are the example. And as we've talked about, this is where if you're going to be a professional aviator and go on to the airlines or charter or whatever, this is where you hone your captain skills as a CFI.
Amen. Pass the collection plate. Three more things and we'll get you all out of here. Number one, I've learned that there was a little bit of a snafu with the quiz link on the NAFI website. So if you're watching this live, hop into the chat room real quick before you get off, and the correct quiz link is in the chat room, and we'll get that fixed on the NAFI website as soon as we can. So I'm sorry about that. And then two questions I want to address real quick. Greg, you're going to like the second one a lot, I think. First one from Jim. Now, Jim, I want to disclaim this, that when Greg answers you, this is not legal advice. We're just talking, right? So
yeah.
Jim says, I replaced the wingtips on my 175 with the Horner tips, and now it stalls about 10 miles an hour slower. There's no info with the STC. Do I need to mark up the POH myself? What would you tell Jim or any owner in that position?
Get something in official from the STC holder and talk to the FAA.
Simple enough. All right, one more question. I think you're going to like this one from Nikki. I was curious if Greg had any questions on entering into the career field of aviation safety.
I'll tell you what, you want to be a very accomplished aviator, have a safety, a safety core. I would, and I encourage all the people that I'm mentoring right now, that if they're in school, they should minor in safety. You have to be able to step outside yourself as an accident investigator. You are not the epitome of how everyone else should be flying. You have to look at pilots with certain credentials, certain hours. What would the prudent pilot do under these certain conditions? But in order to really understand how a pilot or pilots will react, how they get themselves into trouble, how they are successful, safety, looking at the world from outside. The way I simply describe it is, as long as we operate, as long as we fly it, fix it, and manage it inside the box, we're in safe haven. I live outside the box. We know that pilots, mechanics, and managers will stray right to the edge, sometimes stray outside the box. That's when problems happen. Now, I've strayed outside the box as a pilot, but I knew it and I got back in the box. That's safe haven. My job happens when people stray outside the box and they can't get back in. And
what would you tell Nikki?
It's a good perspective.
What would you tell Nikki if she said that she wanted to follow in your footsteps and get into the investigation world?
I think the biggest thing right now is that the FAA has done an outstanding job. There's a book called Risk Management. If you can understand the book that the FAA has published about risk management, and of course the Flying Handbook, and there's a couple of other very good textbooks that deal with aviation safety. And I'll be happy through, if you send us an email, I'll send you the names of those books. Get that fundamental understanding of what safety is all about. People say that word all the time without really understanding what safety is in aviation.
Amen. That's a good note to end on. Greg, thank you so much for this. It's been on my list for a long time to do something with you. I know we've been kicking this around for a while, so I'm so glad we got to do this. And we had a comment, and thank you for saying this in the chat. And I'm going to butcher your name, Palkara. I probably messed that up, but they said, but the choir benefits from a repeat sermon, and true words there. So thanks so much, Greg.
Thank you, Aaron.
Couple more little housekeeping things before we let these nice people get on with their nights. Next month, another good one, July 15th. We're going to be getting ready for Air Venture. NAFI will be there, so make sure you come and see us. We're going to have another really good friend of the organization, Josh Harnagle from Redbird. If you've ever heard him present, he is a pro. He's going to give us an update of the State of Flight Training 2026, and so I know everybody's going to benefit from that. So we'll see you there. Once again, want to thank Avemco so much, the official insurance of NAFI, and they do so much for our organization and for a lot of friends of our organization. So if you're in the market for airplane insurance, for CFI insurance, definitely give them a holler. That QR code will take you right where you need to go. I mentioned if you're still looking to take the FAA wings quiz, which you all are because you want to get that wing certificate, make sure for the short term, take a look at the chat. The correct link is in there. We'll get the link on the website fixed as soon as we can. And y'all know I'm going to say this because I always do. If you're not a member of NAFI, we'd love to have you. Nikki, that's you too. You do not have to be a a CFI, you don't even have to be a private pilot yet. Student pilots are welcome. You just got to care about our mission, and it's important to all of aviation. So with that said, we're going to wrap this thing up, and we will see everybody back here on July 15th. So y'all have a great night, and thanks again.
Hello, I'm Marcy Veroni. Avemco is proud to be the official insurance of NAFI. NAFI members are a special breed of CFIs, dedicated to higher professional standards and committed to safety. That's why we created and underwrite the NAFI CFI insurance program, with advantages, features, and savings available only to NAFI members. The NAFI CFI insurance program lets you save money by purchasing coverage only for the type of aircraft you instruct in. You have the option of insuring only for single-engine land and light sport, or for multi-engine, or seaplanes, or amateur-built, or any combination. You can tailor to your own situation. Another benefit of Avemco's NAFI CFI insurance program is you automatically get extended protection from lawsuits from former students as long as your policy is still in force at the time of their accident. If you have a covered claim under the NAFI CFI policy, we'll even pay your legal fees with no cap on the amount, regardless of your policy limit. Plus, you'll be covered for both instruction and your personal flying. For more information or to request a quote, please visit us online, or better yet, give us a call and we'll tell you all about the program. Happy, safe flying.